At my son's wedding, he whispered the words that shattered my world. "You're not my family anymore." And then he asked me to step away from the family photograph. But you won't believe what I did when he called his mother-in-law his new real mother. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Just 2 hours after his cruel declaration, my son completely lost control, unleashing a chain of events that became impossible to reverse. An envelope containing $25,000, my entire retirement fund, was tucked into my purse. Its presence a heavy, undeniable weight against my side. I sat in my car, staring out at the parking lot of the Oakwood Grand Manor, which was a veritable showcase of affluence that made my reliable 15-year-old sedan look like a museum piece. The polished surfaces of Mercedes, BMWs, and Lexus vehicles gleamed under the afternoon sun, each one costing more than my salary from 2 full years at the manufacturing plant. From behind the steering wheel, I watched as guests, draped in elegance, floated towards the grand entrance. The women were in shimmering designer gowns, and the men wore tailored suits that likely cost as much as I'd spend on groceries in half a year. My own dress, the very best one I owned, suddenly felt cheap, its fabric coarse and its fit awkward. The paper of the envelope crinkled audibly as I shifted in my seat. That money represented 6 months of grueling 60-hour work weeks. It was the sum of countless skipped lunches and a long list of canceled plans with friends. It was all for this day. For Julian's wedding. It was my little boy's special day. Except, he wasn't my little boy anymore. At 28, he was a man with a flourishing career in marketing, marrying into a level of wealth I could never have imagined, let alone provided. His new in-laws, the Hayes family, practically owned the entire commercial district of downtown Chicago. Eleanor Hayes, his future mother-in-law, could probably purchase my entire suburban block without even glancing at her bank statement. But I was his mother. Surely, that had to mean something. Taking a deep breath, I finally stepped out of the car, smoothing down my dress one last time. The crisp September air was fragrant with the scent of thousands of expensive flowers, and carried the delicate, lilting notes of a string quartet, playing in the manor's sprawling gardens. Other guests swept past me with an air of practiced nonchalance, utterly at home in this world of immense privilege. I trailed behind them at a careful distance, feeling every bit the imposter. The manor's entrance was breathtaking, with massive crystal chandeliers sparkling through the towering windows. Uniformed valets directed the flow of luxury cars with quiet efficiency. Every surface, every detail, shimmered with the kind of polished elegance that only a great deal of money could procure, the very money I had sacrificed to give Julian the wedding I thought he deserved. "Mom?" I turned, my heart leaping at the sound of his voice. Julian stood in the doorway, looking absolutely radiant in his tuxedo. The fine fabric transformed him into someone almost ethereal, a picture of matrimonial perfection. For a fleeting second, he looked just like the little boy who used to charge into my arms with a scraped knee, seeking comfort after a long day at school. "Oh, you actually made it." His voice was devoid of warmth, holding no trace of joy. It was filled only with a mild, detached surprise, as if my arrival was both unexpected and a minor inconvenience. Before I could even find the words to respond, he had already turned his back to me. "Eleanor, Richard," his voice instantly transformed, becoming bright, musical, and filled with a profound affection. "Come and meet my mother." Eleanor Hayes approached with the confident, measured stride of a woman accustomed to being in charge. She was tall and silver-haired, wearing a gown that undoubtedly cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her husband, Richard, followed closely, elegant in a dark suit, his smile perfectly polite and practiced. "Margaret, my friend," Eleanor said, her handshake firm, her smile wide but completely empty of genuine feeling. "How are you enjoying retirement? It must be quite a change of pace from the factory." Her words felt like a series of tiny, stinging needles. The factory? not my role as a systems engineer. The phrase was deliberately diminishing, as if I had spent 30 years of my life sweeping floors instead of designing and implementing complex manufacturing systems that saved her friends' corporations millions of dollars. It's been wonderful, I managed to reply, my own smile feeling stiff. Congratulations on gaining such a remarkable son. Oh, we're the fortunate ones, Richard chimed in, his voice as smooth as honey but with an undercurrent of steel. Eleanor, look how lovely. Our new son has such a hard-working mother. Hard-working. It was another one of those words meant to diminish, reducing 3 decades of specialized, skilled work into simple, brute effort. Julian beamed at them, his face aglow with a genuine adoration, the same kind of warmth he used to reserve only for me. Aren't they incredible, Mom? He asked, his voice full of awe. They've been so wonderfully generous, so welcoming. They truly understand what family really means. The pointed emphasis he placed on the word really cut far deeper than Eleanor's casual condescension. I reached out to take my son's hand, desperate for a flicker of connection, some small trace of the unbreakable bond we once shared. He stepped back with a smooth, practiced motion, preserving his perfect groom-like posture. We should head inside, he said. The photographer is ready to start with the family pictures before the ceremony. Family pictures. The phrase should have filled me with joyful anticipation. Instead, a cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach as I watched him link arms with Eleanor and Richard. He walked between them as if he had always belonged there, as if they were his true parents. I followed them in, feeling utterly forgotten, completely invisible. The envelope in my purse felt heavier with every single step. $25,000. It was my sacrifice, my gift, my desperate, failing attempt to prove that I still had a place in my own son's life. The interior of the manor was so opulent, it literally took my breath away. Glimmering crystal chandeliers cast a cascade of rainbow-colored light across the polished marble floors. Enormous floral arrangements, some taller than I was, filled every available corner, their fragrance almost cloying. The tables were draped in fine silk, and the chairs were adorned with ribbons that probably cost more than my entire weekly budget for groceries, and all of it, every last luxurious detail, had been paid for with my money. My pension, my financial security, my future, all of it had been transformed into this lavish spectacle of wealth. A display that impressed everyone, but held no acknowledgement of the person who had made it possible. I was financing my own erasure. It's magnificent, isn't it? A woman standing beside me murmured with a sigh of appreciation. The Hayes family certainly knows how to throw a party. Your son is so very fortunate. Fortunate. Another word that felt deeply wrong, as if his new life was the result of luck rather than a calculated choice, a matter of chance, rather than a conscious decision to leave his past and me behind. I just nodded politely, unable to speak, afraid that any words I might utter would betray the vast, growing emptiness in my chest. I heard Julian laugh at something Richard whispered, the sound, light and joyous. He had never laughed like that with me, not for years, not since he began his determined climb up the social ladder, a ladder that led him further and further away from the son of a factory worker and towards a world of supposed respectability. The photographer was setting up his equipment near the grand fireplace, adjusting his lights and checking his angles. His name was Marcus, according to the $2,000 contract I had signed. That was $2,000 I had earned by working double shifts, while other women my age were enjoying their weekends and planning their retirements. This way, please, a wedding coordinator said, guiding me towards a section of seats off to the side. The groom's family seating is right here. Groom's family? Singular. As if I were the sole remnant of Julian's past life, a historical artifact to be politely seated but not truly celebrated. I sank into the designated chair, watching as Eleanor placed a proprietary hand on Julian's shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so comfortable, the same way I used to guide him through crowded places when he was a little boy. Long before he decided that a working-class mother's love was simply not enough. Before he concluded that the devotion of a woman from the factory floor couldn't possibly compete with the allure of country club connections. The envelope in my purse crackled again as I Saturday $25,000. It was the price of admission to witness my own son's rejection, a sum I had paid with every single hour of overtime I had worked since the day he announced his engagement. Marcus began to organize the group, chatting with the Hayes family with an easy familiarity. They responded with the casual confidence of people who are accustomed to being photographed, to having their lives documented and celebrated. Julian was glowing under their attention, basking in a kind of social validation that I had never been able to offer him. "All right. We'll begin with the immediate family," Marcus announced, his professional voice carrying easily across the cavernous, beautifully decorated space. "All close relatives, please gather around the groom." I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress, my heart beginning to pound as I prepared to take my rightful place beside my son. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the formal, public acknowledgement of our bond. A moment to be captured forever in wedding photographs that would adorn their walls for generations to come. Julian smiled brilliantly as Eleanor and Richard flanked him on either side. Chloe, his new wife, took her position with a practiced grace. The Hayes family formed a perfect, seamless circle around him, their expensive attire and confident postures creating a tableau of complete success. I started to approach the group, my heart beating a little faster with anticipation. My steps felt lighter as I moved towards the photography area. Finally, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Standing proudly next to Julian, being recognized as his mother in front of everyone who was important to him. These were the cherished mother of the groom photos that belonged in every wedding album, the images that would preserve our relationship for all time. Marcus adjusted the settings on his camera, his professional eye carefully scanning the group. "The lighting here is perfect," he commented. "This is going to be a beautiful shot." He looked up, his smile warm and welcoming. "Is everyone ready? Let's capture this wonderful family moment." The Hayes family arranged themselves so naturally around Julian, their expensive clothes creating a cohesive portrait of elegance and affluence. Richard's hand rested proudly on his new son's shoulder, and Eleanor beamed with a look of maternal fulfillment. Chloe stood confidently beside her husband, secure and at ease in her new place within this privileged inner circle. I moved closer, ready to take my position in the frame. 28 years of raising Julian on my own, of attending every single school play and parent-teacher conference, of working extra shifts to pay for his art classes and college tuition, it had all led to this single moment of formal recognition. Actually, Julian's voice was like a shard of ice cutting through my approach. "I need to make something clear." He turned to face me, and his expression shifted from that of a radiant groom to something cold, distant, and unfamiliar. The change was so instantaneous that, for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I must have imagined it. "Sorry, Mom, but you're not my family anymore." His words, delivered with crystal clarity, echoed across the silent space, reaching the ears of every guest within range. These are my real family members now. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. The polished marble floor felt like it was shifting. The dazzling crystal chandeliers blurred into a smear of light. The extravagant floral arrangements swirled into a dizzying kaleidoscope of color and confusion. 28 years of bedtime stories, of school concerts and graduations, of shared tears and laughter, of whispered dreams between a mother and her son. All of it was erased with a single, brutal sentence. It was deleted, declared null and void, in front of a room full of strangers in $1,000 suits. "Sweetheart, maybe we shouldn't." Chloe's voice was a weak note of protest, her discomfort palpable even through the thick fog of my shock. "No, Chloe," Julian's tone was sharp, leaving no room for argument. "It's time for some changes. My future is with the Hayes family now. This is my real family." He gestured towards Eleanor and Richard with a look of unmistakable pride, his face glowing with the kind of love and acceptance I remembered so vividly from his childhood. It was the same expression he used to have when I'd surprise him with his favorite comic book or stay up late helping him with a difficult school project. Except now, that look was directed at people he had known for barely 2 years, while the woman who had raised him all by herself stood on the outside, excluded, dismissed, and erased from the family portrait, like an unwanted, intrusive shadow. Marcus lowered his camera, his discomfort evident as he found himself in the middle of a family implosion he had unintentionally triggered. Other guests had paused their conversations, their attention drawn to the unfolding drama. A wave of whispers began to ripple through the elegantly dressed crowd, spreading like a stain across expensive silk. "I understand," I heard myself say. The words felt as if they were coming from somewhere deep inside me, forced out through a throat that felt tight and crushed. "Enjoy your photos." I turned away from the group, away from my son, away from the life I had mistakenly believed we had built together. Each step I took felt like I was wading through quicksand, heavy and agonizingly slow. The whispers followed me, a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and second-hand embarrassment. My assigned table was waiting in a lonely corner, set with a single-place setting and surrounded by empty chairs. The wedding coordinator had mentioned earlier that other guests would be joining me, distant relatives and old family friends, but for now, it was just me, confronting the stark, chilling reality of my isolation. I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly feeling too weak to support the immense weight of what had just transpired. The envelope in my purse crackled again, its substantial weight now feeling like a mockery. $25,000. The price I had paid to finance my own public humiliation. Behind me, I could hear Marcus resuming the photography session, the distinct clicking of his camera shutter, the gentle instructions he gave as he posed the Hayes family around my son. Their laughter drifted across the room, sounding warm, inclusive, and utterly complete without me. Beautiful. Now, Julian, tilt your head slightly towards Eleanor. Perfect. Richard, could you move just a step closer? Excellent. Each click of the camera was capturing moments I would never be a part of, creating memories that would be framed and hung in their homes, preserved in their albums forever. It was the official record of Julian's new family, the people who truly mattered in his life now. I stared down at my hands, weathered and worn from 30 years of honest, hard work. They bore the faint scars of countless small injuries, all earned while providing for a son who had just publicly declared me irrelevant. These were the hands that had built his model airplanes, taught him how to ride a bike, and signed every single check for his education and his dreams. Now, they trembled almost imperceptibly as the full, crushing weight of his rejection settled deep into my bones. The photography session continued behind me, the voices bright and celebratory, Richard's deep laugh, Eleanor's gentle suggestions, Chloe's confident responses, and woven through it all, Julian's voice, sounding musical and happier than I had heard it in years. He was happy, genuinely and completely happy, in a way that he never seemed to be with me anymore, not since he had begun his relentless climb toward a different kind of life. The Hayes family offered him something I never could: social acceptance, financial security, and the kind of validation that came from belonging to the right social class. My hands were still shaking slightly as I pulled out my phone and checked my bank balance. The money was all there, poised for the transfer scheduled for the next morning. $25,000 that would soon vanish from my account and flow into the coffers of the Oakwood Grand Manor, paying for the flowers, the food, and the music that were all celebrating my replacement. "Are you all right, ma'am?" A young server had materialized at my table, her expression kind with genuine concern. She looked to be about Julian's age, probably working hard to pay for college or to support a family of her own. She was the kind of person my son used to be, before he decided that working-class values were not sophisticated enough for his new, elevated aspirations. "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Just taking it all in." She gave me a sympathetic nod and moved on, leaving me alone once more with the sounds of celebration that surrounded my small corner of silence. The photography session was winding down. I could hear Marcus thanking the Hayes family for their patience and cooperation. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing Julian's radiant face, flushed with the satisfaction of having made his statement so unequivocally clear. He had chosen his side, drawn a definitive line, and declared his new allegiances. Now, it was time for me to choose mine. The envelope in my purse seemed to pulse with a newfound potential. $25,000. My life savings, my security, my future comfort, all sitting in an envelope addressed to a son who had just publicly disowned me. But the money hadn't been transferred yet. The check hadn't been cashed. The payment could still be stopped. I sat there, perfectly still, as the wedding celebration swirled around me, my mind beginning to race with possibilities I had never dared to consider before. Julian had made his choice about family loyalty, about what mattered and who counted, and where his heart truly belonged. Perhaps it was finally time for me to make mine. The reception began with all the dazzling pageantry that money could buy. A 12-piece orchestra launched into classical melodies that soared and echoed off the manor's magnificent crystal chandeliers. Servers in crisp, immaculate uniforms glided through the room, carrying silver trays laden with appetizers that likely cost more per piece than I typically spent on my entire lunch. I remained at my corner table, a silent, solitary observer of my own lavish financial investment. Every single detail that surrounded me had a price tag that I had long ago memorized from a stack of invoices and contracts. The catering? $12,000. The flowers? $3,000. The band? $4,000. Photography? $2,000. The venue rental? Another $4,000. Each expense had been painstakingly carved out of my pension. Each one a piece of my future, sacrificed for this single moment of elegant celebration. "Your son looks absolutely radiant," an elderly woman at a nearby table commented, leaning over with an air of genuine warmth. "You must be so incredibly proud to give him such a beautiful wedding." I nodded slowly, my gaze fixed on the dance floor where Julian was gliding in Eleanor's arms. The traditional mother-son dance, stolen from me and gifted to my replacement. "Everyone gets what they deserve," I said quietly. The woman beamed, completely missing the sharp edge in my voice. "Oh, how wonderful to hear. Family is just everything, isn't it? Some bonds are stronger than others," I replied, my eyes never leaving the dance floor. Eleanor spun Julian gracefully, the fabric of his suit flowing like expensive silk around them. He laughed at something she whispered. His laugh bright and musical, the same way he used to laugh with me when he was a little boy, before he learned that laughter shared with a working-class mother wasn't sophisticated enough for his ambitions. My phone vibrated against my leg. It was a notification from my bank, the automatic reminder for the payment transfer I had set up weeks ago. Wedding payment scheduled for tomorrow, 9:00 a.m., 25:00 to Oakwood Grand Manor, 24 hours. That's how much time I had before my money became irrevocably theirs. Before my sacrifice became permanent. Before my humiliation was paid for in full. With steady fingers, I pulled up my banking app. The balance stared back at me. 27.47. My entire liquid worth, accumulated over decades of careful saving and endless overtime shifts. By this time tomorrow, it would plummet to just $2.47, enough to cover groceries and utilities for a few months, if I was extremely frugal. The dance ended to a round of enthusiastic applause. Julian hugged Eleanor with a display of obvious affection, then moved on to dance with Chloe. Meanwhile, Richard theatrically wiped away tears of joy, a perfect family moment. All of it documented by Marcus's camera and funded by my rapidly emptying bank account. "This must have cost a fortune," another guest remarked as he approached my table, his voice filled with admiration. "You are an incredibly generous woman." I looked up at him, a complete stranger who seemed to understand the value of this wedding far better than my own son. "It's been educational," I replied. He laughed, assuming I was making a joke about the expensive lessons one learns in wedding planning. If only he knew just how educational this whole experience was proving to be, how clearly it was illustrating the price of love, the cost of loyalty, and the exact monetary value of 28 years of devoted motherhood. The orchestra transitioned into softer dinner music as the servers began to present the first course. Herb-crusted salmon, I recalled from the menu selection. $47 per plate. $47 multiplied by 120 guests. Another, 600 of my pension, served on china that cost more than my monthly car payment. I accepted my plate mechanically, the expensive flavors turning to ash in my mouth. All around me, guests were exclaiming over the quality of the food, the elegance of the presentation, the sheer expense of the celebration. They understood perfectly well that someone had paid dearly for this luxury. They just incorrectly assumed that whoever that someone was, they were happy to do so. I remember when my son got married, an elderly woman across the table shared with a nostalgic smile. Such a special bond between a mother and son. Nothing can compare to that moment of watching him start his new life. I methodically cut my salmon into precise, tiny pieces, each movement controlled and deliberate. Some sons prefer to start their new lives on their own. She looked puzzled by my comment, but didn't press the issue, turning back to her conversation about the beauty of the ceremony. I continued to eat, to watch, to calculate. Julian moved between the tables with the grace of a seasoned host, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced ease. He had grown into this role so naturally, as if he had been born to navigate these kinds of social gatherings where the champagne flowed freely and the small talk sparkled with insider references and shared connections. When he reached the tables near the Hayes family section, his laughter became more genuine, his gestures more animated. But when he approached the working-class relatives and old factory friends I had invited, his smile, while still perfect, became slightly strained, his conversation shorter and less engaged. He was editing his past in real time, graduating from one social class to another, with the efficient brutality of someone who knew exactly what he wanted and who he needed to discard to get it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my bank. Reminder: large transfer scheduled for tomorrow. Call customer service to cancel or modify. Cancel or modify. 3 words that, at this moment, held more power than any others in my vocabulary. 3 words that could transform this entire celebration from a triumph into a catastrophe with a single phone call. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. My own reflection staring back at me from the black glass, 62 years old, with graying hair, wearing my best dress to attend my own son's rejection ceremony. I looked exactly like what I was, an aging factory worker who had saved every last penny to afford one single moment of importance in her son's life. That moment had come and gone. Now, I was just an expensive guest at my own execution. The dinner courses continued with clockwork precision. The soup course, $18 a bowl. The salad course, $12 a plate. Each bite represented hours of overtime I had worked, weekends I had sacrificed, small comforts I had denied myself. All so Julian could impress people who would judge him by the elegance of his reception rather than by the love of his mother. "Such a lovely wedding," someone commented to their companion. "The Hayes family certainly knows how to celebrate properly." The Hayes family, as if they had been the ones to plan and pay for everything, as if their money had transformed this manor into a showcase of elegance and taste. As if I were merely a footnote in their celebration. A working class, relative to be tolerated for the sake of appearances. Marcus moved through the crowd, capturing candid moments between the courses. Happy guests. A loving family. A perfect celebration. His camera never once turned towards my corner table, where the woman who had made it all possible sat alone, with her untouched champagne and a fury that was steadily growing. Richard rose from his chair, moving towards the microphone with the confidence of a man accustomed to public speaking. The crowd quieted in expectation, sensing that an important moment was approaching. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the decorated space. "I'd like to say a few words about our wonderful new son. Our son. Not Margaret's son, who was marrying into our family. Our son. As if Julian had been born into the Hayes clan, raised in their world of privilege and proper connections." I set down my fork, my appetite now completely gone. My hand moved unconsciously to the purse on my lap, my fingers tracing the outline of the envelope that held the check that would complete my financial sacrifice. But Richard was still speaking, and something in his tone told me that this speech was about to deliver yet another blow. Another painful reminder of my irrelevance in Julian's new life. I focused on his words, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. The champagne in my glass had gone flat, its bubbles disappearing just like my illusions about family loyalty. All around me, guests leaned forward attentively, ready to witness another moment of Hayes family eloquence. I waited, my hand still resting on the envelope, as Richard prepared to deliver what I sensed would be the final, crushing insult to my decades of devoted motherhood. Richard's voice faded as he handed the microphone to Julian with paternal pride. My son rose gracefully, his champagne flute catching the light like a crystal beacon. The entire reception hall fell silent, 200 guests turning their full attention to the radiant groom. For one desperate, fleeting moment, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Perhaps this was it, my chance for redemption. This was the traditional groom's speech, where he would thank his mother for her love, her sacrifices, her unwavering support through 28 years of devoted parenthood. "Thank you all for sharing this perfect day with us," Julian began, his voice confident and musical. "I want to take a moment to recognize the most important people who made all of this possible." He paused, scanning the crowd with practiced poise. His eyes swept right past my table without a hint of acknowledgement, landing instead on Eleanor and Richard at the head table. My grip tightened on my water glass. "Eleanor, you became the real mother I always needed," he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed room with devastating clarity. "The one who showed me what maternal love should truly look like. Unlike my biological mother, you succeeded where she... well, let's just say you set the bar much, much higher." A ripple of gentle laughter spread through the crowd, polite, understanding chuckles from guests who believed they were witnessing a moment of charming honesty, rather than an act of calculated cruelty. My world collapsed into that single phrase. Real mother. 28 years of bedtime stories were reduced to a punchline. Decades of overtime shifts were transformed into a comedic failure. Every sacrifice, every skipped vacation, every double work week I took on to afford his dreams, all of it was dismissed with casual laughter from strangers who were drinking champagne purchased with my pension. Richard stood slowly, accepting the microphone from Julian with a look of dignified grace. "My dear son," he said, the word son rolling off his tongue like a claim of ownership. "It has been my honor to guide you toward the happiness you so rightly deserve. You needed a mother who could truly understand your worth, your potential, your proper place in the world." More applause. Enthusiastic approval, from people who understood the subtext perfectly. Working class devotion simply couldn't compete with country club cultivation. The love from the factory floor was insufficient for someone with Julian's refined aspirations. "Welcome to our real family, darling," Eleanor added, her voice thick with emotion as she embraced my son. Real family. The words echoed in my skull like hammer blows. Real mother. Real family. A real life that apparently had no place for the woman who had raised him alone after his father died, who had worked 60-hour weeks to afford his tuxedo, who had completely emptied her savings to fund this elaborate celebration of her own replacement. I stood up quietly, my movement barely noticed amidst the continuing toasts and congratulations. There was no dramatic exit, no angry confrontation, just a woman in her best dress, slipping away from a party that had transformed her love into a source of public entertainment. The heavy manor doors muffled the sounds of celebration as I pushed through them. Behind me, the applause continued for my son's brave honesty about upgrading to better parentage. Ahead of me lay the parking lot, and the cool, crisp September evening air that promised a clarity I could not find inside. My footsteps echoed on the marble floors as I walked away from 28 years of motherhood, which had just been officially terminated by a public vote, and recorded by professional photographers who would preserve this moment in wedding albums for all time. Real mother. The phrase followed me out into the night, like a curse I had paid $25,000 to hear. The cool air hit my face as the restaurant doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of celebration like a heavy curtain. Streetlights cast a soft glow over the parking lot, where the luxury vehicles sat gleaming in neat, orderly rows, their polished chrome surfaces reflecting my own isolation back at me. My old sedan waited in the far corner, looking humble and functional amongst its prestigious neighbors. I walked towards it slowly, my footsteps the only sound in the suddenly peaceful evening. There was no applause out here, no laughter, no speeches declaring my obsolescence. There was just the silence and the distant, steady hum of traffic on the interstate. Reaching my car, I leaned against the driver's side door and, with trembling fingers, pulled my wallet from my purse. The leather was soft with age, worn smooth by decades of honest work. Tucked carefully behind my driver's license, in a clear plastic sleeve, was a photograph I had carried with me for 18 years. It was Julian, at 10 years old, with a wide, gap-toothed grin, his arms wrapped fiercely around my neck in a tight embrace. We had been at the state fair. His face was sticky with cotton candy, and his eyes were bright with a simple, uncomplicated joy. He had won a stuffed elephant at the ring toss, and had loudly declared me the best mommy in the whole world, before falling fast asleep in my arms on the drive home. "Mommy, promise me you'll always be there for me," he had whispered that night as I tucked him into bed. "Promise you'll never leave me like Daddy did." My throat tightened as I stared at that innocent face, trying desperately to reconcile it with the man who had just publicly divorced me in front of 200 strangers. When had that trusting, loving child transformed into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? The answer came with an unwelcome clarity. It had happened gradually, methodically. Over the 2 years since he had met Chloe, there had been small changes, things I had tried to rationalize as him simply maturing. His embarrassment when I would pick him up from dates in my aging car. His suggestions that I should dress better when meeting his new affluent friends. His gentle, condescending corrections of my grammar, my manners, my working-class background that no longer fit with his elevated aspirations. I had enabled every single transformation. I had paid for etiquette classes so he could fit in better with Chloe's social circle. I had bought him expensive clothes for country club events, where the sons of factory workers needed proper camouflage. I had worked extra shifts to fund the gradual erasure of everything that connected him to me. David would have set boundaries, I whispered to the photograph. Thinking of my late husband, he would have stopped this before it ever started. But David had been gone for 15 years. And in my grief, I had raised Julian with boundless love, instead of firm lessons, with unchecked generosity, instead of crucial guidance. Every time he had pushed against his background, I had smoothed the path forward for him, instead of teaching him to value where he came from. Looking up at the stars, which were barely visible through the city's orange glow, I made a decision. It felt like waking up from a long, troubled dream. David had trusted me to protect our son. But protection didn't just mean enabling his worst impulses. Sometimes, it meant teaching him about consequences. I carefully folded the photograph and placed it back in my wallet. The little boy who had once called me the best mommy in the whole world was gone, replaced by a man who valued social status far more than parental devotion. But I was still here, and I was still capable of teaching one final lesson about respect and gratitude. My hand moved to my purse, where the envelope waited, heavy with possibility. Under the harsh, fluorescent glow of the streetlight, I pulled the envelope from my purse and extracted the check with a slow, ceremonial deliberation. $25,000, written in my careful, neat handwriting, signed with the very same pen I had used to endorse his report cards and sign permission slips for field trips to museums. Museums he later learned to navigate as a sophisticated adult. The paper felt substantial between my fingers, real in a way that emotions sometimes aren't. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. This was 6 months of 60-hour work weeks, condensed into a single, negotiable instrument that could transform a celebration into a catastrophe with one simple phone call to my bank. I studied my own signature, remembering the moment I had signed it. Just 3 weeks ago, I had felt so proud then, so sacrificial, in the way a mother is supposed to feel when she is giving her son his dreams. Now, that signature looked like evidence of my own foolishness, documentation of just how thoroughly I had been played. $25,000. I whispered to the empty parking lot. 6 months of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, every small comfort denied. The mathematics of it all were ruthless in their clarity. $12,000 for catering that would feed people who had just laughed at my inadequacy. $3,000 for flowers that would wilt and die by tomorrow, while my humiliation would live on forever in a set of professional photographs. $4,000 for music that had provided the soundtrack to my own replacement ceremony. Each expense had seemed so reasonable when I had imagined walking my son down the aisle, sharing the traditional mother-son dance, being acknowledged as the woman who had made his happiness possible. Instead, I had funded my own funeral as his mother, complete with heartfelt eulogies delivered by his new, improved family. "He wants to treat me like a stranger," I said to the cold September air. "Then I'll start acting like one." The decision crystallized with a surprising sense of peace. There was no anger, no thirst for revenge. It was just the simple, undeniable logic of cause and effect. Julian had made the choice to publicly sever our relationship. I was merely honoring his choice by implementing its natural consequences. With deliberate precision, I tore the check in half. The sound of the ripping paper was deeply satisfying in its finality. One piece went into the left pocket of my dress, the other into the right, a commitment device that made reversal impossible without a conscious, deliberate act of taping it back together. The feeling of liberation was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the heavy weight of someone else's expectations. I had no son to impress, no in-laws to satisfy, no social obligations to fulfill with money I couldn't afford to spend. I straightened my dress and smoothed my jacket, composing myself for my return performance. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about education. It was the final lesson in a curriculum I had started 28 years ago, when I had promised to raise a good person. "I promised to take care of him," I said quietly, remembering David's trust and my own naive, good intentions, not to enable his cruelty. Walking back towards the restaurant entrance, I felt calmer than I had all day. Let him show everyone who he really was when the bill came due. Let Eleanor and Richard demonstrate their unwavering commitment to their real son when financial reality took the place of social performance. I reached the heavy doors and paused, my hand on the cool brass handle. I took one deep, steadying breath before re-entering the world that I had just turned upside down. Behind those doors, a celebration continued in my honor, or, rather, what had been my honor, before I had reclaimed it for myself. The 2 torn pieces of the check rested in my separate pockets, a secret that would soon transform into the most expensive lesson in respect that money could ever buy. The heavy doors swung closed behind me, with a muffled finality, sealing out the cool evening air and returning me to the warm, glittering bubble of the celebration. The crystal chandeliers cast the same golden, shimmering light. The orchestra played the same elegant melodies. And the guests continued their animated conversations over champagne and expensive appetizers. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything was different. It wasn't the scenery that had altered, but the observer. I walked through the reception hall with measured, deliberate steps, no longer the anxious mother desperately seeking approval. The torn pieces of the check in my pockets felt like weapons, small paper bombs, that would detonate precisely when the moment was right. Each guest I passed, each elaborate flower arrangement I noticed, each note from the 12-piece orchestra, now represented money that would very soon become someone else's problem. My table was waiting, exactly as I had left it. The untouched flute of champagne was still reflecting the light from above. I sat down slowly, arranged my napkin in my lap, with meticulous care, and began to watch the celebration with new eyes. Julian was dancing with his groomsmen near the center of the room, his laughter bright and musical as he gestured towards the opulent floral displays. "Just look at this venue," he said to his best man, loud enough for me to hear. Chloe spared no expense for our special day. He spun in his $3,000 tuxedo. Well, technically, my mom paid for everything, but Chloe chose all the beautiful details. Technically, my mom paid. As if my 6 months of grueling overtime shifts were just a minor technicality in their grand, romantic story. At the head table, Richard clinked glasses with Julian, both men wearing the satisfied expressions of successful negotiators. "Thank goodness for his mother covering the wedding costs," Chloe confided, her voice carrying to the nearby tables. "This would have taken us a year to save for. Maybe 2. It's just wonderful when simple people understand their place in supporting better things. Simple people." The phrase rolled off her tongue with a casual, effortless contempt, as if factory workers existed for the sole purpose of funding the dreams of their social superiors. I gripped my water glass tighter, feeling the torn paper rustle in my pocket. "You must be so proud," an elderly guest at a neighboring table said, leaning towards me with genuine warmth. "What a generous gift, to give them this perfect wedding. The venue, the flowers, everything is just magnificent. Everyone gets exactly what they deserve," I replied quietly, my voice carrying an undertone she couldn't possibly interpret. She beamed at me and turned back to her conversation, completely missing the promise hidden within my words. Around me, the celebration continued with an expensive momentum. Servers circulated with silver trays bearing $40 appetizers. The photographer captured moments that would preserve this evening forever in professional albums. The orchestra played requests that cost more per song than most people spend on entertainment in a month. Every single detail had been meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, all of it financed by my sacrifice, my pension, my future security. The irony of it was almost beautiful in its perfect symmetry. I was watching my own money celebrate my own replacement. "Isn't this just wonderful?" Eleanor approached my table, a champagne flute in her hand, her maternal satisfaction radiating like heat from an expensive fireplace. "Julian looks so happy. It's just marvelous when everything comes together so perfectly." "Perfect," I agreed, checking my watch. 7 o'clock was approaching with a mechanical inevitability. "Timing is everything." She nodded sagely and moved on. completely unaware that she was speaking to a woman who was counting down to a detonation. I watched her rejoin Richard at their table, both of them gesturing proudly towards their new son, as if they had discovered him rather than simply purchased his loyalty with social status and a series of empty promises. Across the room, the venue manager, Mr. Costello, moved between tables with professional efficiency, checking on details and coordinating the service with his staff. Occasionally, his eyes would sweep towards my table, not with suspicion, but with the natural timing of a businessman who understood reception schedules. Payment time would be coming soon. It was as inevitable as gravity. I straightened my dress and smoothed my jacket, preparing myself for the performance of my life. 28 years of motherhood had taught me patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Tonight, I was going to teach my son about consequences, boundaries, and the crucial difference between being generous and being used. The orchestra struck up another waltz, and couples took to the dance floor. Julian danced with Chloe, their faces glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from having every single one of your dreams funded by someone else's sweat. They moved together with a practiced grace, a perfect couple celebrating their perfect wedding in their perfect world. In 15 minutes, that perfection was going to meet reality. Mr. Costello appeared at the edge of my vision, a leather folder in his hand, approaching with the measured pace of a man who had done this hundreds of times before. Mrs. Baker. Excuse the interruption. Mr. Costello's voice held the professional courtesy of someone accustomed to handling financial transactions discreetly. He placed the leather folder on my table with practiced precision, its contents representing the culmination of months of planning and expense. It's time for the reception payment settlement. Here is the final itemized bill. I opened the folder slowly, my eyes scanning the numbers that I had memorized weeks ago. Catering, 12,000. Venue rental, 4,000. Floral arrangements, 3,000. Photography, 2,000. Music and entertainment, 4,000. Each line item represented hours of overtime I had worked, weekends I had sacrificed, and small comforts I had denied myself. The total was printed at the bottom in bold figures. 25,000. Julian glided over from the dance floor, Chloe following at a respectful distance. His face was alight with the confident glow of someone who had never once doubted the outcome of any financial negotiation in his entire life. Mom, you know our arrangement. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if he were discussing a tip for the valet. Time to settle up for the celebration. Everything looks perfect, doesn't it? He gestured around the decorated hall with a sense of proprietary satisfaction, his expensive tuxedo catching the light from the crystal chandeliers that I had paid to have illuminated. Behind him, Chloe nodded encouragingly, the relief of avoiding this financial responsibility written clearly across her face. I closed the folder and looked up at my son, this man, who had publicly declared me irrelevant just a few short hours earlier. The transformation was now complete. I had gone from being his devoted mother to a disposable ATM, valued only for what I could provide. I've changed my mind, Julian. The words fell into the sudden silence like stones dropped into still water. His confident smile flickered, though it didn't completely disappear, as if he hadn't quite processed the impossible thing I had just said. Today, I learned exactly who you really are, I continued, my voice steady and measured. And I don't pay for strangers' parties. What are you talking about? His voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. We had an agreement. Everyone is watching. You made it crystal clear that I am not your family anymore, I replied, standing slowly to meet his gaze. So, you can handle this like the independent adult you claim to be. Chloe stepped forward, her face pale with a dawning comprehension. Ma'am, Let's be reasonable about this. We can discuss the details privately. We can work out some kind of arrangement. There is nothing to discuss, I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost friendly. He chose his real family today, so let them pay, like a real family does. The color drained from Julian's face as the full implications of my words hit him. Around us, conversations had quieted as guests sensed the drama unfolding. The elegant bubble of the celebration had developed its first crack, a hairline fracture that was about to become a devastating break. "But, Mommy," he began, the childhood endearment slipping out in his panic. "I'm not your mommy, remember?" I picked up my water glass and took a slow, measured sip. "Eleanor is your real mother now. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to demonstrate her commitment to her real son." Mr. Costello shifted uncomfortably, his leather folder still open on the table, the unpaid bill exposed like an open wound. This was not how these conversations were supposed to go. In his experience, wedding payments were routine affairs, handled with gratitude and celebration, not family warfare conducted over itemized invoices. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the back of an empty chair. "This isn't. You can't just. What am I supposed to tell everyone?" "Tell them whatever you want," I replied. "You're very good at creative storytelling when it serves your purposes." Chloe looked desperately between her husband and me, clearly out of her depth, in a crisis that threatened to destroy the perfect evening she had assumed was guaranteed. "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding here. Surely we can." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted. "Everything is perfectly clear. You got the wedding you wanted, from the family you chose. Now comes the bill." I watched my son's face cycle through a series of emotions. Disbelief, anger, panic, and finally, the first stirrings of genuine fear. For 28 years, he had never once doubted my support, never questioned my willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for his happiness. That certainty was dying in real time, visible in his widening, terrified eyes. Julian turned desperately towards the head table, where Eleanor and Richard sat, their faces now showing the first signs of concern. As they noticed the disturbance at my table, Julian's dress shoes clicked rapidly against the marble floor as he hurried towards the Hayes family's table, Chloe trailing close behind him. I remained seated, watching the drama unfold, with the detached interest of someone observing a carefully orchestrated experiment in human nature. Richard looked up from his conversation as his new son-in-law approached, his patrician features showing mild concern at his obvious distress. Eleanor set down her champagne flute, her perfectly practiced smile faltering slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding with my mother," Julian began, his voice carefully controlled despite the panic I could see building behind his eyes. "She's having second thoughts about the payment arrangement. Something about feeling unappreciated." He forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "You know how emotional older people can get? I'm sure we can work this out. But in the meantime..." He paused, clearly struggling with the words he had never in his life imagined having to say. "Could you, perhaps, help us with the reception payment? Just temporarily, of course, until we can sort out this silly confusion." Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the generous patriarch transforming into a calculating businessman. "Well, Chloe," he said, addressing his daughter directly while pointedly ignoring Julian's appeal, "we've already committed quite substantially to your honeymoon arrangements. The European tour, the first-class accommodations. Finances are rather tight at the moment." Eleanor nodded sympathetically, but her tone carried steel beneath the sweetness. "Of course. We want to support you both, dear ones. But supporting you doesn't mean paying for everything. That's not how real families operate, is it?" The irony of her words was not lost on me from across the room. Real families indeed. Chloe's face flushed with embarrassment and a growing desperation. "But you said we were family now. You welcomed Julian with such love and generosity. Families are supposed to help each other during unexpected crises." And we are family, darling girl, Richard replied, patting her arm condescendingly. But we are not automatic funding sources. Surely you can manage your own financial obligations without expecting us to rescue you from every little difficulty. Eleanor straightened her expensive gown with practiced authority. The wedding arrangements were made between you and your father. We assumed, naturally, that competent adults had handled their responsibilities appropriately. I watched Julian's face crumble as his new family revealed their true nature under the first sign of financial pressure. The loving, generous people who had embraced him so warmly were now showing their carefully hidden selfishness with surgical precision. Quick! The gift table, Julian whispered urgently to Chloe, abandoning diplomacy for desperate pragmatism. We need to open the envelopes. Count everything. Maybe there's enough to cover at least part of it. Chloe nodded miserably and followed him to the elegantly decorated gift table, where envelopes and wrapped packages sat in a careful, beautiful arrangement. Under the curious stares of the nearby guests, they began the humiliating process of tearing open their wedding gifts to count cash donations. This one's from your co-workers, Chloe muttered, extracting a few bills from an envelope. $200. She moved to the next. Your cousin Sarah, $150. The amounts accumulated with agonizing slowness. 50 here, 100 there, with an occasional, more generous 200 or 300 from closer relatives. Julian's hands shook as he calculated a running total, his perfect wedding composure disintegrating with each opened envelope. Guests at the nearby tables watched with uncomfortable fascination as the groom and bride conducted an impromptu audit of their own wedding gifts. How much so far? He asked, his voice tight with suppressed panic. Maybe 4,000, Chloe replied quietly. 5. At the most. The photographer and the band. We could probably cover those, but the catering and the venue. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Even with every single envelope opened and every gift monetized, they were facing a shortfall that would leave significant debts unpaid and vendors unsatisfied. Mr. Costello appeared at their makeshift counting station, his professional patience beginning to show visible strain. I don't mean to pressure you, but we do have other events scheduled. The kitchen staff is waiting to clean up, and we need to settle accounts this evening. Julian looked up at him, his eyes now reflecting a desperation I had never seen in him before. The gift money scattered across the table told the mathematical story of his situation. Generous, but insufficient. Loving, but inadequate. Well-meaning, but ultimately useless against the stark reality of $25,000 in unpaid bills. He turned back towards my table, his gaze meeting mine across the elegant chaos of his perfect wedding reception. For the first time in years, possibly for the first time in his entire adult life, he was completely out of options, facing consequences without a safety net, and experiencing what accountability actually meant. I raised my water glass in a small private toast to the man who had wanted so badly to prove he didn't need his mother. Now, he was about to discover exactly what that independence cost. Gift envelopes lay scattered across the table like fallen leaves, their contents revealing the cruel mathematics of wedding generosity. Julian's hands shook as he counted the bills with increasing desperation. His perfect tuxedo now looking disheveled, smudged by desperate fingerprints on crumpled 20s and 50s. This envelope is from my college roommate. $60, Chloe muttered, her voice hollow with disbelief. The one from my office colleagues is $125. She moved to the next with mechanical precision. Great Aunt Martha, $50 in a card about finding happiness in simple things. Simple things. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched them audit their own celebration, reducing heartfelt wedding wishes to a currency that fell perpetually, hopelessly short of their desperate need. How much is the total? Julian asked, his voice now stripped of its earlier musical confidence. Maybe 7,000. 800? Chloe replied, her accounting background lending an unwanted precision to their public humiliation. Less than $8,000 in total. $8,000, a generous sum that would have seemed miraculous to most young couples starting out, but was pathetically inadequate against the $25,000 obligation I had withdrawn. They could cover Marcus's photography fees, pay the musicians, and settle the decorating costs. But the $12,000 catering bill loomed like an unpayable mountain of debt. Marcus, the photographer, approached their makeshift counting station with professional discretion. "Mr. Hayes, I believe this covers my services completely." He accepted his payment with gracious efficiency. "Your photographs will be ready by Friday. Congratulations again on your beautiful wedding." Beautiful wedding. The phrase hung in the air like incense from a funeral service. As Marcus packed up his equipment and departed, one vendor was satisfied, but others were still waiting with growing impatience. "We could pay the band," Chloe suggested weakly, grasping for any solution that felt like progress. "Get them settled, and then we can focus on the big problem." They managed the music payments next, watching their precious pile of gift money shrink with each transaction, while the catering debt remained untouched, immovable, a financial boulder blocking their path to celebration. Mr. Costello checked his watch, with the practiced motion of someone accustomed to tight business schedules. "Mr. Hayes, I need the catering payment resolved now. I have policies about outstanding balances, and my evening shift is waiting to complete their cleanup." Policies. The word carried a weight that social expectations simply couldn't match. Mr. Costello wasn't a family member to be charmed, or a friend to be persuaded. He was a businessman with overhead costs and payroll obligations that existed regardless of family drama or wedding day emotions. Julian looked up from his pathetic pile of remaining bills, his face pale with the realization that even their best efforts had failed. "We're still short. Quite a bit. Maybe we could arrange some kind of payment plan? A schedule? Something manageable? My contract specifies full payment upon completion of services," Mr. Costello replied, his voice firm but not unkind. $12,000 was the agreed upon amount. I provided the agreed upon service. I now require the agreed upon payment. Desperate measures demanded desperate choices. Julian turned back toward my table, his pride crumbling like expensive makeup in the summer heat. This was not the confident man who had declared me irrelevant just a few short hours earlier. This was someone who was learning what real powerlessness felt like. "Mom? Please," his voice carried across the room with a humiliating volume. I'm sorry for everything I said earlier. Can you please just cover the catering? I'm begging you here. Begging." A word he had never had to use in 28 years of my unconditional generosity. I looked up from my untouched champagne, meeting his desperate eyes with a calm indifference. "No, Julian." My voice carried clearly, without any raised volume. "You made your choice about family today. It's time for you to learn to live with the consequences." His face crumpled as the final door slammed shut. Chloe tried one last appeal, her financial training searching for angles that simply didn't exist. "Ma'am, surely we can reach some kind of accommodation. Family helps family during difficult times." "Exactly," I replied, letting the implications of the words settle in the air. Family helps family. But you both made it very clear that we are not family anymore. Mr. Costello cleared his throat, checking his watch with a look of growing impatience. "You have 10 more minutes to resolve this payment issue. After that, I will be contacting my security service for debt collection procedures." 10 minutes. The wedding reception had become a twisted game show with a very expensive clock, ticking down towards consequences that would make this evening unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Mr. Costello's voice cut through the reception chatter like a dinner bell, commanding the immediate attention of every guest within hearing distance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption, but I have a business matter that requires immediate resolution. The orchestra stopped mid-song. Conversations died instantly. 200 faces turned towards the drama that was unfolding around the gift table, where scattered envelopes and crumpled bills told a story of financial desperation. Mr. Hayes currently owes $12,000 for catering services provided this evening, Mr. Costello announced with a professional clarity that made privacy impossible. If this matter is not resolved within the next 10 minutes, I will be contacting security services for debt collection assistance. A heavy silence fell over the room like a thick curtain. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting in their seats as they realized they were witnessing something far beyond typical wedding day drama. This was a business failure, happening in real time, complete with specific dollar amounts and public ultimatums. Julian's composure shattered, like expensive crystal hitting a marble floor. "Mom!" The word exploded from his throat with enough force to rattle the chandelier crystals. "You're destroying me. This is all your fault. You have ruined the most important day of my life." His voice cracked on the final words, and tears began to stream down his cheeks, which had been professionally made up just hours earlier. The perfect groom had become a hysteric in a white tuxedo, screaming at his mother, while 200 witnesses watched in horrified fascination. "I have never seen anything like this at a wedding reception," someone whispered at a nearby table, their shock evident despite their attempts at discretion. Chloe grabbed her husband's shoulders, her face flushed with embarrassment and panic. "Julian, please, calm down. Everyone is staring. Let's just handle this quietly." "I don't care who's looking," Julian shrieked, his voice rising to operatic levels. "Let them all know what kind of selfish, cruel mother abandons her son on his wedding day. Let them see exactly what Margaret Baker is really like." He pointed at me with a trembling finger, the fabric of his suit rustling as he turned to address the room like a prosecutor delivering his closing arguments to a jury of uncomfortable wedding guests. "This woman raised me for 28 years, just to humiliate me when I needed her the most. She promised to pay for everything, and then she changed her mind because her feelings got hurt. What kind of mother does that to her own son?" The room remained frozen in an uncomfortable silence. The guests were trapped between sympathy for the groom's obvious distress and the dawning recognition that something far more complex was unfolding than simple maternal cruelty. I stood up slowly, straightening my dress with a deliberate calm. When I spoke, my voice carried the measured authority of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. "Now you understand what real consequences feel like, Julian." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, preparing for my departure. "You declared me irrelevant. I am simply honoring your wishes. You can't do this to me." His voice broke on the final word, hysteria replacing his anger as the full, crushing weight of his situation crashed down upon him. "I have nowhere else to go. I have no one else to ask. Perhaps your real family will help," I replied quietly, letting the phrase hang in the air like an unresolved musical note. Eleanor and Richard remained conspicuously seated at their table, suddenly studying their champagne flutes with an intense fascination, making no move to intervene or assist in the crisis they had helped to create through their earlier refusal to provide support. Walking towards the exit, I could hear Julian's sobs echoing off the crystal chandeliers, his perfect wedding dissolving into chaos behind me. 200 guests sat frozen in their seats, witnessing the complete and utter destruction of a celebration they had expected to remember fondly. The heavy restaurant doors closed behind me, muffling the sound of his continuing breakdown. I walked across the parking lot towards my sedan, each step carrying me further away from 28 years of one-sided devotion and closer to a future that would be defined by self-respect rather than endless giving. Behind me, the elegant facade of the Oakwood Grand Manor contained the ruins of a perfect celebration, where a young man was learning that actions have consequences, and choices have costs that can't be paid with tears or accusations. My Ford started with the reliable, familiar rumble of 15 years of faithful service, a sound that had never seemed more welcoming than it did in this moment of complete transformation. I pulled out of the Oakwood Grand Manor parking lot slowly, watching the elegant venue shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely behind a line of suburban trees and streetlights. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I had navigated thousands of times before. But tonight, they looked different not because the scenery had changed, but because the woman behind the wheel was no longer the same person who had driven this route just a few short hours earlier. Chicago at night had a peaceful quality that contrasted sharply with the chaos I had left behind. Traffic lights cycled through their colors with mechanical precision. Late evening joggers moved along the sidewalks with a purposeful rhythm. Normal people, living normal lives, unburdened by ungrateful children or toxic relationships disguised as family obligations. For 28 years, I had spent my life trying to buy his love with sacrifices that he had come to expect as entitlements. Every overtime shift I had worked to afford his dreams. Every vacation I had skipped to fund his education. Every small comfort I had denied myself to ensure that he never wanted for anything important. Tonight, I had finally learned the difference between love and a transaction. Between gratitude and expectation. Between being valued and being used. My modest house was waiting for me, with the lights I had left on. It was a simple, two-bedroom structure that had always seemed almost shabby compared to the lavish venues where Julian entertained his new social circle. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw it differently. It wasn't a working-class limitation. It was a sanctuary. A place free from people who measured a person's worth by price tags and social status. Inside, everything remained exactly as I had left it that afternoon. My comfortable reading chair, the television I had bought for myself as a retirement gift, and photographs of genuinely happy moments scattered on the end tables and windowsills. The house felt peaceful in a way I hadn't truly appreciated before tonight's stark contrast with expensive anxiety. David's photograph sat on the mantelpiece, where it had resided for the past 15 years. His smile had been captured during a camping trip we had taken the summer before Julian started school. He looked so happy in that candid shot, genuinely content with simple pleasures that hadn't required vast financial investments or social performances. I picked up the frame, studying his face with a new understanding. "I know you would have handled this better, David," I whispered. "You would have set boundaries years ago, before it ever got this bad. But I did what I had to do tonight." He chose his path. Settling into my favorite armchair, I felt the tension of the evening drain from my shoulders, like water from a filled bathtub. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about someone else's expectations or demands. There was no son requiring a financial rescue, no in-laws demanding a social performance, no obligations beyond my own comfort and well-being. Tomorrow, I would wake up with $25,000 still in my bank account, money that could buy me genuine comfort, rather than the temporary approval of people who had never valued the woman who had earned it. I could travel if I wanted to, upgrade my home, pursue the hobbies I had abandoned during decades of child-rearing and working to fund other people's dreams. For 28 years, I tried to buy his love, I said to David's photograph. Tonight, I learned that you can't purchase respect. Some people only understand consequences. The house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of home. The refrigerator's gentle hum, the grandfather clock's steady ticking, the distant hum of highway traffic. These were the sounds of peace, of a life free from drama and demands, and the kind of disappointment that disguises itself as a filial relationship. I thought about Julian, who was probably still at the restaurant, dealing with the aftermath of his choices. Part of me wondered how he had resolved the catering debt. Whether Eleanor and Richard would eventually step forward to help their real son, or if he had finally learned how to navigate financial consequences without a mother to rescue him. But mostly, I just felt relief, a clean, pure relief at being free from relationships that were built on what I could provide, rather than on who I was. Tonight had been expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. It was the cost of finally understanding that enabling is not love, that boundaries are not cruelty, and that self-respect sometimes requires making difficult, painful choices. I placed David's photograph face down on the side table, a symbolic closing of that chapter of my life, when I had defined myself through other people's needs and expectations. Tomorrow would begin differently, focused on a woman who had earned the right to live for herself after decades of living for others. Standing up from my chair, I looked towards the bedroom where my own bed was waiting, not the guest room where I had often retreated during years of walking on eggshells around my son's moods and demands, but my own space, where I could rest without worrying about someone else's financial crisis or social embarrassments. The first night of my new, independent life stretched ahead of me with a quiet, peaceful promise. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.